Former chief architect at some very well-known large healthcare systems. Former Microsoft Active Directory guy supporting US AFRICOM and CENTCOM, mainly around incident response and incident management and AD architecture. Nowadays, I spent my time, kind of like what Gil said, doing incident response for major healthcare brands. I also sit as a resident for some well-known healthcare systems who are very high-value targets. So pretty much do this all day in and day out. I love memes. I'm also known as the chief complainer to our customers because 90% of the job of being an incident commander is explaining to IT and non-IT executives why Active Directory is critical when it comes to isolation and recovery, and trying to really unwind the complexity of it. So I'm hoping the takeaway from this is you go have these conversations with your leadership and also with your peers who are not on the IT side on why things like MFA are critical at the end of the day. So I'm going to walk you through an incident. Actually, the last 5 incidents, some of them, we won't share customer names. Most of these made it on the news one way or another. What's unique about healthcare is we are high churn revenue and critical infrastructure, right? When we have an outage and when you're down for more than 2 or 3 days and you go on bypass and diversion, makes it on CNN's front page, right? Happened last week and 3 weeks before then. And it's always the same conversation. It doesn't just apply to healthcare. It is the same for any type of critical infrastructure at the end of the day. So this is the number one question that comes out of our customers and peers when we go and try to get them prepared for a major incident that occurs. Some executive will always ask, or somebody will ask, what is the most painful and complex part? It's explaining the dependency on Active Directory to everyone else. Not you, right? Not the incident response team, anybody that's ancillary to incident response, specifically the folks that are kicking the door in during a major incident, asking when our system's gonna be back online, and trying to explain the complexity of recovering AD, sanitizing AD, granting authorization and access, making sure we do forensics, and generally it's gonna take days to weeks in most cases. So I actually captured some direct feedback during major events that occurred, and we have to explain why can't we log in, right? How many of you have an incident response plan? A well-documented incident response plan. An incident response plan that doesn't rely on Active Directory and you being able to log into a workstation. So it's literally, you need to go have that conversation right now next time you do a tabletop exercise, not with the incident response team, with everybody else. With your application owners, your executives, your CEO, up to your board, and explain to them what the dependency of Active Directory is and why, because everybody is worried about the application side of the house and getting payroll online, HR, in our case in healthcare, getting the EMR online. None of that is gonna work. You can't even start incident response without having your incident responders, hands-on keyboard, logged into your domain. They can't do their job without Active Directory being available, right? Tier 0 is Active Directory. And it's DNS, DHCP, and your network, and your firewalls, your CA, and everything else that goes along with it. At literally the last 5 breaches, we go back and we do forensics. And a lot of people ask, what are the attack vectors and entry points? Bad people do bad things, right? This comes back to my spirit animal talking about MFA and how everybody, circumvents it for some reason. Phishing still works in social engineering. Almost every major breach that you've seen on the news, it started from social engineering or a very successful phishing or spear phishing attack. And I love memes. Number 2 on the list, somebody from cybersecurity calls and says, hey, your corporate credentials that you're using, your hash seems to match what you have for Facebook and LinkedIn and everything else. Very common. Actually, every time we do forensics, we go get the FireEye report, or we go to Microsoft, right, run some Sentinel reports, and we say, hey, how many of these passwords are actually available out there? About 25%. And they match your corporate credentials, because it's easy to remember the same password. Number 3 on the list, exploitable vulnerabilities, right? And this isn't generally for the initial entry point. Threat actors, hands-on keyboard, are gonna gain access to your network, and they have to explain that to your executives why. Non-IT executives, by the way, not the CISO, everybody else that says, I'm not taking a 4-hour downtime, Who asked the question earlier about the IDP and a 4-hour downtime? Yeah. Take those downtimes. Almost every breach that we've had recently has been some kind of 0-day attack or a vulnerability that should have been patched. You know, I'm not going to point any fingers. VMware, Fortinet, Citrix, just NetScaler. Yep, very prevalent in healthcare, right? A 1-hour downtime could have prevented a 30-day downtime. And third-party vendors and supply chain. This is the biggest issue we have right now. Specifically in healthcare, third-party vendors have way too much access, especially managed services, and the ones that, you know, give themselves exceptions to avoid using MFA, and they have domain admin rights without realizing they have domain admin rights. Very, 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 very common. The comment that came up about enforcing MFA internally, I tell 100% of my customers, if you have a third-party vendor for application access, enforce MFA no matter what. No question asked. We can literally go back and look at all the breaches, and, you know, somebody does a golden ticket attack on a service account that's logged in on the domain, sitting there stale when it shouldn't have been logged in like 3 weeks ago, and threat actors got their hands on credentials, probably third-party credential. And misconfigurations, exceptions. Again, I don't care if you're the CEO of a company. This meme is so true, by the way. The comment from this morning of, oh yeah, everybody has MFA enabled. Oh, you do, right? Can I see that list of people that are MFA enabled? Why is your CEO not using MFA? Or why did he or she delegate their MFA access on their admin's phone and they're hitting push to accept for them? This is pretty much every CXO in my industry. Every time we do a tabletop exercise or they say they have zero trust, everything, all the things to protect their environment, great. You know what I have as somebody on the red team? Your user credentials and access to your MFA to just let myself in. And this is 100% true, by the way. Almost every single time we've done 50 out of 50 times incident response preparedness, and we have a conversation with the CISO or the CIO, and they're proud, right? They're doing a great job. The good ones really say, nothing keeps me up at night. That's awesome. You have an exception for one of your executives that doesn't have MFA enabled, and that's gonna be my easy target. So this is pretty recent in the news. Anybody read the CrowdStrike report that came out at Black Hat, right? 15 years we've been talking about how important identity is with the folks in this room. Everybody else is starting to catch up now, finally. You know, we spent billions of dollars on endpoint detection and response. You know what EDR doesn't do? Tell you when somebody's logged in with your username and password. Yeah, you're supposed to be in, yeah. Yeah, so this actually caught my eye right away. I don't know what metrics this is exactly based on, I read through it. Almost a 600% increase in Kerberos identity attacks. My theory is that there was not really an increase. More people are aware of it now. Kerberos has been an issue for 10 years. It's just the threat actors now have much easier access to doing it, so you don't have to be Gil to be able to roast somebody's account. Also, adversaries bridging legitimate remote management tools, 100% true. And we're gonna walk through an incident that occurred about a month ago on how the threat actors had access and completely evaded Microsoft Defender. Customer came back and was like, Microsoft sucks. No, it's not Microsoft's problem when your credentials are out there and you don't have MFA turned on for VPN. Like, they did their job, you didn't do yours, right? I did Rainbow Road because my daughter's into Super Mario now. And that's how I made this presentation. This is how I kept their attention when I was working on this in the middle of the night. So this is actually what's happening. We've done incident response probably 50 times right now at healthcare systems of all sizes. And it's always the same thing, right? It's an employee or vendor account. At some point, either that day, weeks ago, or months ago, clicked on some kind of phishing email and their credentials became available. Back to running a FireEye, seeing what credentials are compromised. You can probably run that report in your environment right now and then go look at your SIM and actually see attempted logins remotely when somebody's trying to pepper your firewalls or VPN or Citrix or whatever. And most of the time, the threat actors are not even attempting MFA when they get that far. They just want to see what account works, right? That's what I would do. What's really common right now is hands-on keyboard. This is the biggest issue the last 5 breaches that we've had. And it's been very, very consistent, right? Threat actors are strolling into the network with VPN, remote access, MFA. Bad guy to get into your network, they don't need to circumvent it when they're in your network, right? Your third-party vendor, they're not using MFA when they're internal to your domain. And that's been pretty common. What is interesting right now is we are not seeing threat actors set up command and control. What that means is, does anybody not know CrowdStrike? Everybody knows it, right? All right, I'm getting a lot of nods. Every EDR solution will detect CrowdStrike. If I was the bad guy, I would just be hands-on keyboard. I would not deploy any command and control system. Evade the EDR if you can, for as long as you can, right? And then lateral movement. That's what everyone's after, right? Set up persistence, gain lateral movement, try to go detected by any of the EDR tools. What has been common is there's some metric out there that says within a threat actor getting access to your network, I think it's like 80 minutes for them to get their hands on privileged credentials. That is tried and true. And when they get their hands on privileged credentials, they're not waiting to literally become the threat actor in your network. The minute they have privileged credentials, more than likely, they know what your domain looks like, what your group policy settings are, and they have scripts that are ready to be deployed on startup to just hopefully get you to do a mass reboot of all your endpoints and then try to deploy a ransomware payload. And then the goal is, once you have lateral movement, hopefully have a plan. If I was the bad guy, try to disable your EDR tool. I don't want to point any fingers, but there's some out there that you take the console out, and if there's no EDR console and there's no command and control for your sensor's useless. It's not going to do anything on the endpoint. It needs some kind of connectivity, right? And then actions on objectives. Within an hour, whenever we do forensics and we see a privileged account compromised and threat actors who give themselves domain admin rights or take yours away, right? It's resetting domain admin credentials, figuring out what users have MFA access, wipe out the MFA group if you can. Microsoft does a great job of protecting against that right now. Some of the legacy tools don't. Figure out your antivirus, try to eliminate that or at least black hole the IP that you're using if they can get into your core router or your firewalls. And then go right after backups, right? We've had 3 or 4 incidents recently that are pretty new that we've seen the data stores for VMware get encrypted. Not a VMware issue, it is an identity issue because MFA was not turned on for vCenter, or your backup service account has elevated privileges to your VMware environment. And then your SVC_backup account, the threat actor just has to change the password for it and then negate your PAM solution completely. And then Active Directory, what's it good at? Group policies. Every single time we see a threat actor go into your domain-wide settings on all your domains, just make some minor configuration changes and then hope that you go and reboot every workstation when you start panicking when you see ransomware being deployed. And when you reboot, you get a ransomware payload. Hands-on keyboard is the biggest issue, right? How do you detect for this?
How do you get that keyboard? Because
That's a Logitech keyboard, actually. I stole that from Black Hat. This is the biggest threat right now. You can buy all the security tools you want in the world, unless you have rock-solid user behavior analytics and you're managing that in a very accurate and concise way. Threat actors are just evading anything that most customers have for defensive solutions. Don't live off the land and drive. I think that's hilarious. And then after the attack, there's really what a CXO looks like every single time. And they're shocked that all the tools that they had in place didn't stop somebody from, Kerberos-ing one of their accounts. Oh, healthcare is, yeah. I should show you some of the customers we have. Every single one has an SPN attached to it, not just for SQL.
lots of app traversal happening.
Yep.
Right, so account 1 talks to
accounts 2, 3, 4.
Yeah. And I'm going to dive into that, right? We actually have metrics on that information.
You talked about time travel a little bit. I was curious about
Backup solutions. Anytime a backup vendor shows up and says, I have immutability on your backups, that's great until I change your clock to 2027. And then I expire your backups. And then it deletes it, right? They're getting better at this. But there's a perfect example that we saw 2 weeks ago when the customer was like, well, I have pure snapshots running, but my, certain vendor.
changed my time.
Yeah. Like how did my immutable copies get expired? Well, according to your, head nodes in your appliance, it's the year 2027 right now. And they're gone. Back to this. Service accounts, right? Easy targets. Something that stuck out. This is real, by the way. I had a certain CIO in the middle of incident response after 48 hours of being down look right at me and go, why didn't we isolate Active Directory? I thought we had CrowdStrike. And I had to kind of look at them and say, do you know what happens when a sensor goes and isolates your domain? They're like, yeah, nobody can log in. Yes, that you can't. So majority of organizations, you're probably all running some kind of EDR, right? And they're probably on your domain controllers. And you should test this. I don't care who the EDR vendor is. If a threat actor drops a malware payload on a domain controller, which they are avoiding doing right now because they don't want to trip those sensors and isolate Active Directory because they want group policy to work, right? They need those users to get access to your sysvol, reboot, get the malware payload, and the fun begins. We've had a lot of issues during incident response when we go to a customer, it doesn't have a sensor, and we say, we're rolling out CrowdStrike or SentinelOne or Palo. First thing that happens, Active Directory domain controllers get isolated, and there's no authentication. I can't do incident response if I can't get to a domain controller to pull those logs, right? I can't get to domain controller to remove the sensor because we just rolled out all the sensors in full blast mode to protect anything and everything to get telemetry. You should build a read-only domain controller, put your sensor on there, and just go smash the keyboard on it and see what happens. Authentication is going to go down there, RDC, as it should, right? How much time do I have left? All right. Top 10 conversation. There's actually something Gil brought up last year when you were talking about this. What can you do now? These are conversations that you have to go have with your IT leadership and everybody else at the organization. When you do tabletop exercises and they're like, yes, well, we're prepared. We have all of our documentation. Everything's good. We have PAM solutions. Well, guess what? Your documentation is probably stored on a file share or SharePoint or somewhere else that is AD integrated. You're not going to get to it. Your end users are not going to get to their documentation, right? You probably have a PAM solution. We've had a lot of CIOs say, why'd I buy PAM? It's as good as that service account that is connecting to Active Directory, and you knock out that service account, you don't have a PAM solution anymore. Find the attack paths, right? Shout out to Forresterwood for this. Go beyond indicators of exposure, because if you can find your attack paths right now to your service account and traversal for applications using one service account for many, that is the same thing the threat actors are going to do. That's the same thing red teams do and purple teams do. When a application analyst or an application owner, somebody from HR goes, oh no, everything is great, we know what to do on our application, go show them what their service account is doing and why you have to rotate passwords for it and credentials, and why it's critical for them to understand that service account they gave to a vendor to also use as an interactive logon is a major problem, right? So run your tools and figure out what your attack paths are from any domain user to your service accounts. And that's exactly what the threat actors are going to do. Plus, it's going to give you an idea of what you're going to isolate first in a real event. So if you find an HR user that has some kind of delegated access somewhere, or there's an attack path to a service account or a privileged account, you're going to understand what servers are going to be isolated at the end of the day. Incident response tools depend on network and AD. Everything that's out there depends on authentication running, including your incident responder's laptop who has to log in, get onto Active Directory, get on the network to get to your SIM and get into your consoles. So you really need to have a plan for that. Tabletop exercise for domain services restoration. How many of you have actually done a tabletop, not for applications or any of that, just to get Active Directory up and running? I know you have. How many of you have done that for a single domain controller plus running DC promo or getting 20, 30 domain controllers online? Why haven't you done that? Serious question. If you have 40,000 users, one domain controller is not going to be enough, right? Incident response ain't over when that domain controller is online. Do that by itself, by the way. Before you talk app authentication, Citrix, Horizon, whatever else you need, figure out how long it takes to restore a single DC, DC promo the rest, or backup tools that you have in place, and then how long will it take to sanitize the domain. And then who's going to approve it, and then you're going to let your users get back in. Tier 0 applications and cyber services, same as number 3. What applications do you actually need to do incident response? And are they a virtual machine on your network? Are they a cloud service? Are you going to have access to it? My EDR comment earlier, if you're running EDR on your DCs, man, those things get tripped and you isolate your domain or your PDC emulator, it's as bad as having ransomware on your domain controller at the end of the day. Authentication dependency mapping, AD integrated, LDAP, do I need multi-factor authentication? Do I have a third-party directory that I authenticate against? Before you even look at applications, figure out what your dependency looks like just for authentication. For basic functions for cybersecurity to log in, or whoever you have a retainer with to log in and do the job of incident response. And Kerberos, mass password resets. How many of you roll your Kerberos keys every year? Twice a year. Great. If you have an incident, a threat actor gets their hands on privileged credentials, I'm doing that in real time. Plus, mass password resets, right? How many of you have accidentally rolled the key too early and had to do mass password reset? How many of you have talked about it in tabletop exercises? All the time, right? You're thinking about, I have 10,000 users. Well, how do you get them their passwords? One, how do you know you didn't send the password to a threat actor who changed the phone number inside of Active Directory for the cell number attribute that syncs to the HR system? Somebody actually did that. And then mass password resets for vendors and service accounts is a big one. You should have a separate process on how to reset service account passwords. How do you store that password? How do you get it back to the application analyst? And pay attention to that. That is critical. You can reset all the user passwords you want. Unless services are running, users can't do anything. Group policy snapshot is a big one, specifically in the last 2 years. I love group policy. It's magical. I can control everybody's wallpaper and their desktop and shortcuts. So can the threat actors. And how many of you actually firmly believe that your group policy settings are clean right now and you can rebuild them in their current state? Yeah, nobody can. I've had one person say we can definitely do that. I was like, I'm sure you can. Sure. But anytime we sanitize Active Directory, the first thing we're doing is we have to sanitize group policy. Every single GPO that you have out there, someone's going to sit there and go through it line by line and say, hey, is this what it looked like 48 hours ago before threat actors got hands on GPOs? So take a snapshot on a weekly basis of your GPOs. Print them out, put them somewhere, have them ready. Highlight the high value ones that are critical for users to log in, right? And then what's the sanitization process for that? You have 10,000 different GPOs out there for a big organization. Which ones are you going to prioritize sanitizing and bringing back online? After action report and Active Directory logs. This is my least favorite thing, especially when cyber insurance and legal comes asking and goes, give me an after action report. And I want to get all of your Active Directory logs for the last 90 days. It's like, I do too. That's great. Let me know if that happens. That's fantastic. So you want every authentication log ever, right? Including the ones that actually worked for my 500 million authentications a week out of AD. That's cool. But you should come up with a process of what logs are you going to export. and share with cyber insurance, legal, forensics, and anybody else that's actually involved from a third party. And it's not everything when they request it.
On the group policies, couldn't you just see when the last modified time is on the group policy to know whether, you know when you make group policy changes, hopefully, in the organization.
Hopefully you do.
Hey, this one's newer and we didn't make changes, so somebody did something.
Last modified is as good as yesterday. Threat actors that are in your network for weeks and months, that's not good enough, right? In the last 30 days, you probably made a change to group policy. Everybody does.
There are some tools now that you can leverage to monitor the changes in the group policies, which, like a third-party tool, you can perform a lot of administrative tasks. You can clean up a lot of solves with group policy, which has not been there before. I've seen one or two instances, large financial environment where they use that to discover orphan GPOs and all of that, which they need to clean up before the adversary shows up.
You should have a very well-documented process and actually do that yourself. Documentation to me in incident response is completely useless in those scenarios. I want to go find the AD person that understands their group policy and say, hey, are these changes from this server true? Because if I was the bad guy, I would go after the tools that you have to monitor those changes, right? That's really what the hands-on keyboard threat right now is. If I was the bad guy, I would go after your change control tools that you have in place and change management tools for Active Directory and everything else, which half the time is SCCM or something else, right?
That's if you have access to it.
Yeah. When you say you don't have access,
If the bad guy does not have access to it.
yeah, keep their access away. Least privileged access at all times. Anything that we do for incident response, when we go deploy our tools, we deploy out the SP and our sensors or whatever, zero AD integration, period. We don't even share credentials with anybody outside the actual hands-on keyboard incident responders. For that reason, right? We do not want the threat actors gaining access to any of our tools or systems. And then a big one right now, everybody's remote. This is a big problem. Labs, great, works wonderful, unless AD is not available, right? And remote administration. If you don't have sensors rolled out and you have a threat actor in your network and there's ransomware payloads and we're gonna go roll our sensors out and your employees are all at home, we probably shut VPN and remote access off during incident response. And now we have to go deploy our sensors and our tools on 10,000 workstations that are not connected to your domain. And every single time a customer's like, yeah, make a group policy script. Like that's not how group policy works. Your machines need to connect to your network, right? So you have to explain that now. Get ahead of it. And if there's ever mass changes that you have to conduct with GPOs during a major incident, if that's in your playbook, think about it, right? If everyone's at home and there's no remote access, are you going to make them drive into the office? Or is there another solution you can deploy? Yeah, put it on an FTP server. Just use clear text password while you're at it.
Anonymous.
Yeah.
Biometrics could be down as well. So how do you get into the office if you don't have a physical key?
Yeah. We've had that happen, especially in healthcare, right? Labor and delivery is a big part of that we have to always think about. And systems like Hugs that are doing tracking for infants, they stop working. Biometrics goes down for the doors. And it depends on Active Directory at the end of the day, right? That's it.